The wooden box was tucked behind 3 rows of socket wrenches in the back of my husband's tool cabinet, and there was a folded note on top of it in his handwriting. For Hilda. Don't tell Tammy. Inside was a small brass key and an address I had never once seen in 38 years of marriage. Good day, everyone. I'm so glad you joined me. Welcome back to Emma's Stories. My name is Hilda, and today I want to share something with you that I've been carrying for the better part of a year. Please stay with me until the end, and leave a comment letting me know what city you're listening from. I always read them. It means more than you know. My husband, Lester, and I built our life in Cookeville, Tennessee. A town small enough that you wave at people you don't know, and large enough to have a decent hardware store and 2 diners that compete over whose biscuits are better. We married in June of 1986 at the First Baptist Church on Broad Street. Lester wore a charcoal suit that was slightly too short in the sleeves, and I wore my mother's pearl earrings. He told me I looked like a movie star, and I told him he was the worst liar I'd ever met, and we laughed all the way through the reception. Lester ran his own auto shop for 31 years. Mercer's Garage on Jefferson Avenue, nothing fancy, just a 2-bay building with a hand-painted sign and a reputation for honest work that spread through 3 counties by word of mouth. He was the kind of man who'd tell you if your car didn't actually need the repair he could have charged you for. I taught 5th grade at Cane Creek Elementary for 24 years until my hip gave out. We were not wealthy. We were not poor. We were the good, ordinary kind of comfortable, the kind where you pay your bills and go to the lake on summer weekends and argue about whether the ceiling fan needs to run at night. We had 1 child together, a daughter. Tammy turned 44 this past April. She grew up quick, sharp, funny. The kind of girl who got into every school play and had opinions about everything and remembered to call on birthdays. I loved her the way you love something you made from scratch, which is differently from loving anything else in this world. When she married Darren 12 years ago, I tried to love him too. I really did try. Darren was a real estate agent in Nashville. Good-looking in the way that real estate agents often are. Polished hair, firm handshake, a way of making every room feel like a sales floor. He was not unkind exactly. He was transactional. Everything with him was a negotiation, even things that weren't. He treated relationships the way he treated listings, with careful attention that lasted exactly until the closing and not 1 minute longer. I watched him, over the years, slowly redirect my daughter's priorities. Tammy stopped calling just to talk. She called when Darren had a plan that required something from us. Lester saw it before I was willing to say it out loud. He never spoke badly about people. That wasn't his nature. But I noticed, after a while, that he'd grown quieter whenever Darren's name came up at dinner. Lester was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in February. He was gone by the middle of September. 7 months. It went faster than I understood 7 months could go, and also slower, in the way that only serious illness truly understands. I was with him when he passed. Tammy was in the waiting room with Darren. I have tried, most days, not to sit with that fact for too long. The grief was not what I expected. It wasn't dramatic. It was a low, constant pressure, like a hand on your chest that never quite lifts. I moved through the weeks on autopilot. I returned casserole dishes. I wrote thank you notes in handwriting that looked like mine but felt like someone else's. I let voicemails pile up. Tammy and Darren started appearing within 10 days of the funeral. It began gently, the way Darren always began things. He mentioned during a Sunday dinner I hadn't wanted to host that the estate process could be complicated for a widow managing alone. He used the word estate as though Lester and I had lived in a manor house instead of a 3-bedroom colonial on Birchwood Drive. He offered to connect me with a financial advisor he knew, someone who could help me understand my options. Tammy smiled and said it would just be good to know everything was in order. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. I chalked it up to grief, making everyone strange. I gave them the benefit of the doubt the way mothers do, right up until the doubt becomes too heavy to carry. It was 2 months after the funeral, a Thursday afternoon in late October, when I finally got to Lester's garage. He had kept it the way he kept everything: organized, labeled, a place for each thing and each thing in its place. I was going through his tools to figure out what to give to his nephew and what to donate to the vocational school he'd always believed in. I'd gotten through most of the pegboard wall when I opened the big, rolling tool cabinet in the corner. That's when I found the box. Dark green paint, brass latch, cedar smell, the size of a shoebox, hidden behind 3 rows of socket wrenches and a coffee can of stripped bolts he'd never thrown away because he never threw anything away, and on top of it, folded once in that careful block letter handwriting I knew as well as my own face. For Hilda, don't tell Tammy. I didn't open it in the garage. Some old instinct said not to. I brought it inside, locked the back door, and sat down at the kitchen table where Lester and I had eaten 38 years of breakfasts, and opened it carefully. Inside the box was a small brass key on a white paper tag. Written on the tag in Lester's handwriting: First National Savings, 2240 Willow Creek RD. Ask for Mr. Garner, and beneath the key a folded note. He called me by my full name in it. He only ever did that when something mattered. Hilda, it began. I should have told you this a long time ago, and I'm sorry that I didn't. The cowardice was mine, and I've known it for years. Everything I'm going to tell you is yours and yours alone. Please speak to Mr. Garner before you speak to anyone else, especially Darren. I love you every day I have ever known you, L. I read that last line 3 times. I should tell you about the loans. In the years after Tammy and Darren married, Darren had come to Lester twice. The first time, he needed $20,000 to cover a deal that had gone sideways. He called it a short-term bridge and said he'd pay it back within the year. He did not. The second time, 4 years later, he needed $15,000. Same story. Lester gave it to him both times. Not because he trusted Darren, I came to understand, but because refusing meant Tammy would be caught in the middle, and Lester could not bring himself to put her there. He told me about the first loan. He never told me about the second. I found this out from the letter. I sat at that table for a very long time. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street, and I thought, how long did you carry this? How long did you stay quiet so I wouldn't have to worry? And then the colder thought, the one I couldn't push aside. What exactly were you protecting me from? I didn't sleep that night. First National Savings was a quiet bank on the south edge of town. I arrived when it opened at 9 the following morning. The woman at the front desk took my name and went to find Mr. Garner, and I noticed the small adjustment in her expression. Not dramatic, just the look of someone who had been told to expect a particular visitor at some particular point. Mr. Garner was in his early 60s, trim, with wire-rimmed glasses and the measured warmth of a man who had spent a career handling other people's private matters with discretion. He shook my hand, led me to a small office, and closed the door. He said he was glad I'd come. He said Lester had told him I might take a few months. Lester had opened the account 13 years ago. He came in once or twice a year. He and Mr. Garner had coffee occasionally. Mr. Garner said, with the restraint of a man who understood exactly what he was and was not permitted to share, that Lester had been a careful, steady man who knew precisely what he was doing every step of the way. The safety deposit box held 3 things. The first was a handwritten savings ledger in Lester's block print, tracking contributions made over 13 years, modest amounts regular as clockwork. Routed from a separate account I hadn't known about, funded through the proceeds after he sold the garage 4 years back. The final total, updated the January before he died, was $291,000. My hands were not steady when I read that number. The second item was a deed, a small rental property in Bowling Green, Kentucky. A 2-bedroom house Lester had purchased quietly 11 years ago. It had been generating rental income, modest but consistent, routed into the savings account. The correspondence address on the statements was a post office box I'd never seen. The third item was a sealed letter addressed to me, longer than the note in the box. I won't share every word, some of it is too private. But the heart of it was this. Lester had been watching Darren for years. He had seen the pattern, the borrowing, the way Darren talked about money as something that moved toward you if you positioned yourself correctly, the way he had gradually redirected Tammy until she was more his instrument than her own person. And Lester had come to believe, slowly and with great sorrow, that if the full extent of what he'd built were known during his lifetime, it would not be safe. Not with Darren in a position to reach it. He was not hiding it from me. He was hiding it through me, keeping it invisible until the moment I would need it. Until he was gone and I was standing alone and would need to know exactly what I was standing on. I sat in that vault room until my legs stopped trembling. Then I photographed every document with my phone, replaced everything precisely, locked the box, and went to find Mr. Garner. I asked him to note that access was mine alone and to flag any attempt by any other party to enter the box. He nodded in a way that told me he had been expecting this request. I drove home with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. That afternoon, I called Leah Ostrowski. Leah had a small practice above the insurance agency on Maple Street. I had known her for 15 years. She'd handled a property dispute for my sister Ada years back, and Ada trusted her the way you trust someone who has proven themselves under pressure. Leah was in her late 50s, compact and unhurried, with the particular confidence of a woman who had spent decades being underestimated in courtrooms. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain and had a way of going very still when she was thinking hard that made you feel the thinking was going somewhere important. I laid everything on her desk, the photographs of the ledger, the deed, the statements, both of Lester's letters. She read in silence. She asked 4 questions. Then she sat back. "He did this right," she said finally. "He really did." We spent 2 hours together that afternoon. By the end, I had a plan. Leah would file for full probate, covering all assets, including the previously undisclosed accounts, with complete documentation. Everything transferred solely into my name. The Kentucky property would be appraised and placed under professional management. A financial advisor Leah trusted named Gwen Pace would consolidate the accounts, and we would establish a formal record that I had sought independent legal counsel, been fully and freely advised, and acted without any other party's involvement. That last piece was the armor. I executed every step quietly over the following 2 weeks. I signed documents. I met with Gwen. I had the Bowling Green property assessed. I did all of this while continuing to answer Tammy's calls warmly, listening to her talk about nothing, saying nothing. It was Darren who figured it out first. I should have expected that. He called on a Wednesday evening. The practiced casualness was gone from his voice, replaced by something brittle underneath the surface politeness. He said he'd heard from someone at the bank. He didn't say who, that I had been in to meet with the branch manager. He said he and Tammy just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page regarding the estate. He used the phrase moving forward 3 times. I kept my voice even. I said I was handling things appropriately with legal counsel, and that he was welcome to review the probate filing once it was submitted to public record. 20 minutes later, Tammy called. Her voice was careful, warm, rehearsed. She asked if I could come for Sunday dinner. She said Darren hadn't meant to come across the wrong way. She said she just wanted to make sure I wasn't alone in all of this, that she and Darren only wanted to help. I thanked her. I said I needed a little more time. I was already dialing Leah before I set the phone down. I went to my sister Ada's house in Memphis for 5 days. I let her feed me and make me laugh and walk her dog along the greenway in the mornings. I let myself be someone's little sister for a little while, instead of a widow running a defense. When I came back, I was steady in a way I hadn't been before. 3 weeks after the calls, a gift basket arrived at my door. Specialty jams, good crackers, a small potted succulent. The card said, "Mom, we're sorry. We've been handling this all wrong. Can we start fresh? All our love, Tammy and Darren." I looked at that basket for a long while. It was thoughtfully assembled. That was, I understood, precisely the point. Darren called that evening. His voice had been rebuilt into warmth. He said he'd been under extraordinary stress. That losing Lester had hit Tammy harder than she'd let on. that he was sorry for anything that had come across as pressure. He asked, gently, whether there might be a way to sit down together as a family, not with lawyers, just to talk, and make sure everyone felt their needs were being considered. He said there was certainly enough for everyone and that surely Lester would have wanted harmony in the family. There was certainly enough for everyone. I thanked him for the basket. I said I needed a little more time. I kept my voice warm and entirely unmovable. When I set the phone down, something settled in me. Not peace exactly, but the particular quiet that comes when you stop hoping a situation will improve on its own and accept that you are the one who will see it through. I didn't want the basket in my house. I brought it to my neighbor Mona, who had been checking on me since September and who I had been gently deflecting. She cried a little when I knocked on her door. We had coffee for 2 hours. I told her none of the details, but I let her in. That mattered more than I'd realized it would. That week I called people. I called Mona again. I called my friend from church. I called Ada. And I called Jenna, Tammy and Darren's daughter, my granddaughter, 23 years old and living in Knoxville. She had sent me a text 3 weeks earlier that had been sitting with me. "Grandma, I don't know exactly what's going on, but if you need me, please call. Just wanted you to know." I hadn't called because I didn't want to put her in the middle. But her text had told me something important. Whatever was happening in that house, it wasn't unanimous. Jenna picked up on the second ring. We talked for nearly 2 hours. She was careful with her words. She loved her parents, and she was not going to throw them under any bus. But she confirmed, in the quiet way of someone choosing each word with precision, that there had been a great deal of conversation in her parents' house about her grandfather's estate, about what was left behind and where it was. She said she hadn't been comfortable with it. She said she was glad I'd called. I didn't ask her to take sides. I asked her to stay in my life. She said she wasn't going anywhere. From Leah's reports, Tammy and Darren had gone quiet on the formal front. No filings yet. I used the time carefully. I updated my own will to reflect the full estate. I arranged for professional management of the Kentucky property. I built the record piece by piece, exactly as Lester would have built it. Methodically, completely, without leaving anything open. Then they filed. A Tuesday morning in December. Leah called me before my coffee had finished brewing. She sounded the way she always sounded, precise, unruffled, faintly satisfied in the manner of a chess player watching an expected move finally arrive. The petition alleged undue influence, specifically that I had, in the final years of Lester's illness, isolated him from his daughter and used my position as sole caretaker to pressure him into financial arrangements that excluded Tammy from any inheritance. They were seeking redistribution under standard succession, which would divide the assets roughly in half. "What's our position?" I asked. "Airtight," she said. The hearing was set for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, something happened that I had not planned and had not asked for. Darren was part of a group text thread. He'd been running it with 3 couples from his real estate network, people I knew by name and not much else. Somewhere in the weeks between the gift basket and the filing, Darren had used that group chat to map out what he and Tammy were doing. He had referred to the estate as a waiting asset. He had described the soft approach they'd tried as the entry point before escalating. And he had referred to me, in a text message, in writing, in words that would eventually be printed and placed in a court filing, as the old woman who doesn't understand what she's sitting on. One of the people in that group chain had a professional connection to someone in Leah's network. The screenshots arrived at Leah's office on a Monday morning. She called me that afternoon and read me the relevant portions. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, I was quiet for a moment. Then I asked, "Are they admissible?" She said, "We'll make sure they are." The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. A gray blazer, a blouse the color of sage, the pearl earrings Lester had given me for our 30th anniversary. I wanted to look like exactly what I was, a woman of 69 who understood precisely what she was doing and had documentation to prove it. The courtroom was small. Probate hearings usually are. No jury, no gallery. Just the judge, these attorneys, a court reporter, and us. Darren was already seated when I arrived, beside Tammy, their attorney between them like a seam holding two things together. Darren looked at me when I walked in. Something moved behind his face that I couldn't name. Then he looked away. Tammy did not look at me at all. She was studying a document in front of her with the focused attention of someone who has decided that eye contact is a concession she cannot afford. Leah presented our case without flourish. She walked the judge through Lester's medical records, clean cognitive evaluations from both his oncologist and his primary care physician, covering the final 2 years of his life, neither of which showed any evidence of impairment. She presented a letter from Mr. Garner attesting that he had met with Lester twice yearly for 13 years and had observed no confusion, no unusual behavior, no sign of diminished judgment. She presented the savings ledger, organized, dated, internally consistent through January of Lester's final year, the work of a meticulous, fully capable mind. She presented his letters, which were precise and deliberate and written with the clarity of a man who knew exactly what he was saying and why. Then she introduced the screenshots. Darren's attorney asked for a recess the moment he saw them. The judge granted 10 minutes. During those 10 minutes, I sat still and watched the thing I'd been watching for months. Darren's composed front developed a crack that no amount of real estate polish could close. He was talking to his attorney in a low, rapid voice, his hand moving in tight, small gestures. Tammy was not talking. She was sitting very still, staring at the table. I recognized that stillness. I had sat that way myself in Lester's garage, holding a box I hadn't yet opened. When the hearing resumed, Leah introduced the screenshots into evidence. The phrase waiting asset was read into the record. The phrase entry point before escalating was read into the record. And then, in the flat voice of a court reporter, transcribing words a man had tapped out on his phone and imagined would never travel past the people he'd sent them to. The phrase the old woman who doesn't understand what she's sitting on was read into the record. Darren's attorney challenged the admissibility. The judge allowed them. Darren took the stand. Leah's cross-examination was methodical and brief. She asked him to describe specific occasions on which he had personally witnessed Lester make decisions that seemed confused or out of character. He could not produce a single one. She asked whether he had ever, during Lester's illness, contacted Lester's physicians with concerns about his mental state. He had not. She asked whether he had raised these concerns with me at any point while Lester was still alive. A pause that lasted long enough to be its own answer. He had not. So these concerns arose after your father-in-law's death, Leah said. It was not a question. Yes, he said. Thank you, Leah said. Nothing further. The judge ruled that afternoon. The petition was denied in its entirety. The estate remained as filed, wholly in my name, exactly as Lester had intended. The judge noted briefly in his closing remarks that the evidence of Lester Mercer's competency was thorough and consistent, and that the petition had been inadequately supported and was, in his assessment, undermined by the nature and timing of the materials entered into evidence. He did not specify which materials. He did not need to. I thanked Leah in the corridor. Her handshake was firm and brief. Then I walked to my car, sat for a long time without starting the engine, and let myself exhale. A long, slow exhale that had been waiting since October. The consequences arrived quietly over the following weeks. Darren's text messages were now part of the public court record. In the real estate business, in a mid-sized city where professional networks run close, word travels in ways that can't be tracked and can't be stopped. I did not contact his clients or his broker or anyone in his professional circle. I did nothing, which was all I needed to do. 3 of his listings were transferred to other agents in January. His brokerage put him on a performance review in February. By March, he had separated from the firm. He did not land somewhere else quickly. The phrase, the old woman who doesn't understand what she's sitting on, was doing quiet work in the world entirely in his own words. I received this information from Mona, who heard it through someone else. I noted it with the specific sadness I had come to associate with anything connected to Darren. I had never wanted him humiliated. I had only ever wanted what Lester had left me. That those two things turned out to be connected was his doing, not mine. I did not celebrate it. I simply noted it the way you note the weather. Tammy called once, about 6 weeks after the hearing. She did not sound like herself, or rather, she sounded more like herself than she had in years. The strategic warmth was entirely gone. So was the brittleness. What was left was something quieter and more fragile. The voice of a woman who had watched the floor drop out from under the version of her life she'd believed was solid. She said she was sorry. She said she had let someone else do her thinking for too long. She said she had known, somewhere deep that she had refused to look, that what they were doing was not right. She said she had been thinking about her father, about who he actually was, apart from what Darren had told her his absence meant. I listened to all of it without interrupting. There is a patience that mothers develop over the years, the kind that can hold a long silence without rushing to fill it. "I know," I said when she had finished. She asked, in the smallest voice she'd used with me in years, "Are we okay?" "We're not okay right now," I told her carefully. "But I'm not done with you. Do you understand what that means?" A pause. The kind where someone is deciding whether they deserve what's being offered. "Yes," she said. "Then give it time," I said. "And please talk to someone, a real someone, not someone Darren hires. Someone who will tell you the truth, even when it's hard to hear." She said she would. She said it quietly, without any of the performing quality her voice had carried for years. Whether she did was her own work to do. I had said what was mine to say. I was her mother, not her therapist. Those are not the same thing, even when the line blurs. Jenna came for Christmas. She drove up from Knoxville with a bottle of good red wine and a tin of shortbread and the particular kind of attention that young people rarely give to older ones. Unhurried, genuinely curious. We cooked together. We talked for hours. She told me carefully, without editorializing, that her parents had separated in November. I listened without commenting. I did not feel triumphant. I felt the particular sadness of watching two peoples discover, too late and in the hardest possible way, that choices have weight. On New Year's Eve, I sat in Lester's study with a glass of cider and took the green box from the drawer where I'd placed it after the hearing. I set it on his desk and looked at it for a while. For Hilda, don't tell Tammy. He had carried this for 13 years, not because he didn't trust me, but because he trusted me completely, trusted that when the moment came, I would know what to do. And I had, eventually. After the sleepless nights and the cold fear and the mornings when I wasn't sure I was strong enough for any of it. I had been afraid. I want to say that plainly. Anyone who tells you that standing up to your own family while you're still raw with grief is easy is not telling you the truth. The fear was real. It moved through me more than once like cold water. But underneath the fear was something harder and steadier. Lester had done a difficult, careful thing for 13 years so that I would be protected. He had trusted me with it. He had believed I was the kind of woman who would handle it right. I tried to be worthy of that. Spring came early to Cookeville. I had the front porch railing repainted. A deep navy blue Lester had once circled in a home improvement magazine and never quite gotten around to. Mona said it changed the look of the whole house. I planted tomatoes in the side garden for the first time in 3 years. The rental income from Kentucky gave me a financial ease I had never had before. Not wealth, just the quiet absence of a low background hum of worry that had been running so long I'd stopped noticing it. I gave a portion to the vocational school Lester had believed in. I opened a savings account in Jenna's name to be hers when she turns 30. My life is smaller in some ways now. Lester is gone, and some things don't come back and you don't expect them to. But smaller is not the same as diminished. I have Mona across the street and Ada at the other end of a phone call, and Jenna driving up from Knoxville on long weekends. I have Lester's study where the afternoon light comes in at a particular angle that still makes me stop whatever I'm doing and stand there a moment. I have a green box in the top drawer of his desk that I will keep for the rest of my life. And I have this, which I want to say plainly to anyone listening who may be sitting in something like the position I was in. Grief is not weakness. A widow is not a soft target. And when someone who loved you spends years quietly building something to keep you safe, the very least you can do is be brave enough to let it work. That's what Lester did for me. I tried to be worthy of it. I think I was.